Hello friends, welcome back to the cabin, and today's video is all about fresh milled flour, and it's hands-on because I'm going to show you how to make the most amazing banana nut bread from your fresh milled flour. To better understand the differences in conventional flour and fresh milled flour that you grind at home, we need to understand the parts of the actual wheat berry. Now there's 4 parts, but the first part is going to be considered the chaff, and it is removed immediately after harvesting. That's going to leave the 3 other parts, the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. So we're going to start with the bran, which is the outermost layer, and it's going to be a protective coating of the seed, and a wheat berry is actually the seed that a wheat plant germinates from. And the bran is removed in processing. But why the bran is so important in home meal flour is because of the vital nutrition in it. It is full of B vitamins, of course it's fibrous. It has digestive enzymes that help you to digest the fiber and the flour once you begin baking with it. So it's just a bounty of nutrition that is completely lost when the flour is processed conventionally. Now next we're going to have the germ, and you may already be familiar with wheat germ that you can find in the stores, and most people use that as a topping on their yogurt, sometimes as an additive to their cereals, because it also is a nutrient dense part of the wheat kernel. Most notably, it is most notably known for the high amount of natural vitamin E versus vitamin E that a lot of times we find is a synthetic. So the wheat germ is also very important nutritionally to our health. So lastly, we're left with the endosperm, and that is where we get the white powdery substance that we're so familiar with that we find in the bags in the grocery store. Now the endosperm is made up mostly of protein and starch, and in some processes it is even bleached to make it even whiter than before. So you can see that freshly ground flour really outdoes itself when it comes to the nutrition that you and your family will reap the benefits of. Another reason to switch to fresh milled flour at home is basic economics. A 5-pound bag of organic flour in the grocery store typically runs somewhere between $6 and $7, which comes out to be about $1.40 a pound. A 50-pound bag of organic wheat berries is $30.31, somewhere around that, but I figured it up to be 61 cents a pound. Plus you're getting everything. You're getting all the nutrition and the fiber, the enzymes, all the good things for you that's not sifted out. So last but not least, another delicious reason to switch to fresh milled grains from home is the taste. If you've never tasted something baked with fresh milled flour, when you take a bite of that, it's going to dawn on you just how bland conventional flour really tastes. You're going to taste that deep, God-given flavor that's been missing in our diets for so long, and you're going to really appreciate it. And it's just a bonus when it comes to choosing to switch to fresh milled flour for you and your family. So we're going to talk just a second about how fresh milled flour behaves differently when we go to bake with it, to mix and bake with it. Well, first of all, we just talked about the lost nutrients, so I'm going to list that again here, is that it's different because it is full of nutrition, not void of nutrition like the conventional milled flours. Another point that you're going to notice when it comes to fresh milled flour is that when you start with your wheat berries and you finish with your ground flour, you're going to end up with more flour measurement-wise than what you started with the wheat berries. So for instance, if we want 1 cup of fresh milled flour, we're going to start with about 2/3 cup of wheat berries. Another thing that I have noticed is that when we have the complete kernel in our flour, the bran and the germ, they carry a little more oil than just the conventional endosperm. So when you're adding oil to your recipe, you want to be careful to not add more than the recipe calls and actually back it off a little bit, because it tends to make your final product maybe a little heavy and a little too greasy. So we're going to cut back on those oils in the recipe, because the bran and the germ actually are adding their own oils to the recipe. The bran and the germ will also affect liquid absorption in our recipe. So we're going to cut back a little bit on our liquids, see how our flour reacts before we add any more. We want to err on the side of less, because we can always add a tad bit more. But if we add too much, then we can't take it out, and you don't want to keep adding flour, because that's going to alter the recipe and you end up with a heavy product. So I think it's time to go ahead and start making our banana nut bread. Once you've got your oven preheating to 350 degrees, the next step is to go ahead and mill your flour. So we're going to go ahead and put our 1 cup in the hopper. Oop, not quite 1/3. That's 1/3. The type of wheat berries that we're using is a soft white wheat berry, and the reason that we're going with that versus a hard white or a hard red is the lower protein content, which makes this better for pastries, cakes, pie crust, and banana nut breads. Now, if you are baking a yeast bread or a sourdough bread, you want a hard red or a hard white, because it has more protein, that it can develop that gluten that gives you that great structure when it comes to those yeast or sourdough breads. So let me go ahead and get the lid on. And we're going to turn it on. Now, I'm not going to make you listen to the whole thing. Let's go ahead and measure out 1 3/4 cups that our recipe calls for. First of all, we're going to go ahead and scoop up 1 cup. And remember, this is the whole grain. This is actually whole grain flour. Let's see if I've got a little spoon here. So we've got the bran, the germ, the endosperm, and all the nutrition that God intended for us to have. So we're going to level this off. Let's make sure we use the flat side. So that's 1 cup. So 1 1/3 cups of the soft wheat berries went very, very far. So that'll also let you know just how economical it is to have the wheat berries at home, and they store indefinitely as long as you keep them in a dry place and away from pests and rodents. We'll talk about that in another video. So now we're looking for 3/4 cup. Okay, so we're going to call that 3/4 cup. So I did go over on my wheat berries, 2/3 cup to 1 cup of ground flour. I actually went 2/3 cup twice. That's where I got 1 1/3 cups. So that should have given us 2 cups or a little bit over. This is a little bit over. So that kind of lets me know next time I do the soft white wheat, I can cut it back just a little bit. So I'm going to set this off to the side, and we're going to continue on with our recipe. Now that we've got our fresh milled flour, I want to go back to another step that we need to do before we get deep into the recipe, and that is we want to go ahead and oil our pan. I'm using one of my favorite stone loaf pans, and it's pretty well seasoned on the inside, so it's got a really light coating of ghee. Ghee is my choice when it comes to making sure that I've got my pans oiled for anything that I bake. But another point that I want to stress with you is, remember when we talked before, is that our grains have their own natural oil in them. So I want you to be very light when you oil your pan, because we don't want to end up with a grease-laden, fat-laden crust on our banana nut bread. To our 1 3/4 cups of flour, we want to go ahead and add a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of baking powder, and a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. Now all of those are in here in this bowl, so I'm going to go ahead and put those in there like that. And I'm going to go ahead and incorporate that well. This is 2/3 cup of an unrefined, unbleached sugar. So we're going to go ahead and blend that well. And I like to do this by hand. I don't want to do it in a stand mixer because I like to get the feel for it. But by all means, if you prefer a stand mixer, you can sure do that. Just make sure that you don't overmix when it comes to adding your liquids. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the oil in the wheat kernel again in our home milled, fresh milled flour. Because we have oil already in the flour, the recipe that I actually use calls for a whole stick of butter, but I cut it back by 2 tablespoons, so I actually only use about 6 tablespoons. Now that is room temperature butter, good and soft. And if you've ever made biscuits or any pie crust, anything that you had to cut in, what we call cutting in, that's what we're doing here. Okay, so it's so easy when the butter is at room temperature. We're just gonna cut it in with 1 fork. Sometimes if my butter is super soft, the fork just does not do it, and I just have to take my hand and just kind of squeeze all of that together and work it with my hand. You can see how it's kind of crumbly now, but it's well blended and well incorporated. Okay, so now I need to go and clean my hands off, and I'll be right back. It seems like my bowls and whatever ingredients I'm using always kind of blend together with the same colors, but I think you'll be able to see it just fine. So next we're going to add 2 beaten eggs. Now the recipe calls for slightly beaten, but I go a little bit more than slight because we're not going to be mixing this very much once we start adding our liquids to it, so I don't want to have to try to beat that egg or get it blended well inside the recipe. We're going to make a little well in the center. And so I'm not blending too much. I'm just going to fold this a little bit like that. Now a lot of our moisture is coming also from our bananas. So this is the second liquid actually that we're adding. Now it's beginning to turn a little bit brown, but we won't tell anybody because it's going to be good and cooked and brown when we slice into it anyway. So I'm just going to do a little bit of blending like this. Okay, so we want to go ahead and add a generous 1/2 cup of chopped pecans or walnuts. If you have walnuts available, you can certainly use those. Now I'm not going to stir. I have one more thing to add. Now you don't have to add this. If you don't have grated lemon peel or lemon zest, you can certainly leave it out, but it does add a little more depth of flavor to your batter. Okay, so now this is going to be very important. We are just gonna moisten, and you'll watch me get all this done, but I'm not gonna beat it. We're not making like a cake, a birthday cake or anything. I'm gonna pull from the bottom and fold it over a few times. Pull from the bottom and fold it over, just like that. Not very much. And you see, that's it. That's all we're doing. Okay, so the next step is to go ahead and get this in our pan. And get it in the oven. So I'm actually going to go with a spatula so that I can get all of this in there. So you're going to cook this about 50 minutes. You're going to check it about 45 minutes. Everybody's oven is different. I'm going to try to do this where you can see it in the camera. And you see, I didn't blend, I didn't stir, we didn't beat it, and you can see that it is plenty moist. Now, one thing that I have found with the whole grain flours, and this is a plus for us because me and my family do not like super moist, wet in the middle banana nut bread. And I have found that when you use fresh mill grains, fresh mill flour, that seems to eliminate that problem. And another note about that, the recipe calls for 3 bananas. I reduced it to 2 because that is part of the moisture that we're putting in here. And remember, we wanted to actually step back the moisture because of the characteristics of fresh mill flour. So instead of 3 mashed bananas, I did only 2. So we're going to go ahead and get this in the oven, and I'll be back with you in about 50 minutes. What a beautiful loaf of banana nut bread made from our own fresh mill flour. Now there's a couple of things I'm going to talk to you about to kind of let you know when it's ready and ready to come out of the oven. But first of all, we need to let it rest in the pan for about 5 or 6 minutes, somewhere along in there, and that's just going to help it to kind of actually pull away from the walls just a little bit, make it easier to be able to get it out of the pan. One of the signs that your banana nut bread is actually ready to come out of the oven is that you can see it pulling away from the edges of the pan like this. There's actually, you can see I can stick my knife in there and it's actually pulled away from the pan. So another way that I like to test, I do 2 or 3 because banana nut bread, because it can be very moist in the center, it can be a little bit tricky. It might fool you as to it really being completely done all the way through. Is I will take my finger and I will push on the center, and if it springs back, then that's a good indication that it's done. And also inserting a toothpick right in the center and pulling it out, if it's clean, that's another indication that it's done. So if you have all 3 of those, you can feel pretty confident that your banana nut bread is ready. Now we're going to leave the pan sitting on the cooling rack to cool there so that it's actually getting air, some air moving underneath it as well. That's going to help it cool down just a little bit. And then in a few minutes we're going to take it out of the pan and we're going to let it cool out for about another 5 or 10 minutes, and then we're going to slice it and it gets a taste test. Well, it's been about 10 minutes, so let's see how easy it is to remove this banana nut bread from the pan. The first thing we're going to do is we're just going to slip a knife down in there, and there's no resistance whatsoever. So it has pulled away from the sides perfectly. So I don't anticipate a problem. If it does stick, it might be just a little bit tacky on the very bottom, but we're going to go ahead and try this. I don't think it's going to be a problem at all. Set this knife out of the way. This stoneware holds heat really well, So I'm going to use my mitts. We're going to tip it on its side. Then I'm going to use my mitts to kind of help it to come loose, to kind of catch it so it didn't fall. And wow, look at that. It looks kind of dark, I can tell in the camera, but it's not. It's the perfect shade of golden brown. Now, I need to flip it over because I want it upside. I'm going to show you how well the structure is of it. It flips over so easy and keeps its shape. Didn't crumble, it didn't fall apart. It's perfect. So we're going to allow it to sit and rest and cool slightly more for about another 5 minutes, and then I think we can slice it and give it a taste test. But wow, the aroma, if it tastes as good as it smells, it's going to be delicious. It's been about 5 minutes, so let's go ahead and slice it and see what it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and slide this wooden cutting board underneath it. And I'm going to use my favorite bread knife of all time. It's a Humvee. I'll leave a link to it under the product section. I love this knife. It's offset and it's perfect for any type of bread. But I tell you what we're going to do. We're worried about the banana nut bread. So we're going to go ahead and slice it. Oh my goodness, it smells wonderful. Wow, wow. Look at that. Is that not beautiful? Oh, and I know it's going to taste as good as it smells. And it's full of nutrition. It's so much better for you than a store-bought cake or store-bought banana bread. Made with your own fresh mill flour, you just can't beat it. And when you taste your first one, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. So let's give it a try. Never disappoints. It is delicious. But Jerry's waiting on his slice, so I'm going to get him a slice and I'll be right back with you, and I'm going to share some tips and some final words. If you try this recipe out, I would love for you to come back and give us a comment on how it turned out. When you share this with your family, one thing that you can be reassured of is from the kernel to the plate, they will feel the love that went into that. And that is probably the biggest benefit of making baked goods with your home-milled fresh mill flour. And speaking of love, I want to share this gift with you. Don't ever forget that your Heavenly Father loves you. And we'll see you on the next video. God bless.